This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Neetsahone, and today is Wednesday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. That might sound a little strange since Top 10s have only come out on Mondays and Fridays for a really long time, but this month I'm doing a little experiment, where I will put out 3 Top 10s every week, one each on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Depending on the outcome of this experiment, this may continue past January. Anyway, in this series I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition, and today we're going to look at the Infect mechanic, which made its debut in 2010's Scars of Mirrodin. A creature with Infect does damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters, and to players in the form of poison counters. When a player has 10 poison counters, they lose the game, so Infect creatures can effectively win the game by doing 10 total damage. There are entire decks built around Infect in multiple formats, and they specialize in buffing these creatures as quickly as possible and winning the game quickly. Scars of Mirrodin kicked off a block that resulted in the Phyrexian successfully invading Mirrodin and turning it into new Phyrexia. Creatures with Infect are those that were completed on the plane. While the Phyrexian creature type didn't exist back in 2010, all creatures with Infect have since received the creature type in errata. It is of course a particularly good time to take a look at Phyrexian mechanics, because we are in the midst of 3 consecutive sets that heavily feature them. We just had the Brothers' War, we're about to get Phyrexia All Will Be One, which is largely set on new Phyrexia, and after that we'll be getting March of the Machine. As of the recording of this video, Infect hasn't been revealed as a returning mechanic, and I don't think it's super likely to happen in the standard legal components of the set, but we'll see. For now though, let's take a look at the 10 cards with Infect that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours and World Championships. And a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like Regional Championships and Magic Online Challenges. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, it's Plague Stinger. Infect can be particularly potent on evasive creatures, and Plague Stinger is certainly that. It can easily get in and put poison counters on things thanks to flying, and if you can enhance it, it will end the game in a hurry. Slapping Rancor on it or casting Groundswell to buff it is pretty insane. It's gained points in Infect decks in both Block and Modern, but it wasn't quite good enough to remain as a fixture in Infect decks for very long in Modern, and it doesn't have any points since 2014. At number 9, it is Scitherex, the Blight Dragon. This Infect Dragon is pretty impressive as a 5 mana 4/4 with flying and Infect, and you can also pay mana to give it haste and regenerate it. It gained all of its points in mono black and blue black Infect decks while it was in standard. Obviously, given its size and evasion plus possible haste, it could quickly give your opponent enough poison counters to make them lose the game, and unlike a lot of Infect creatures, it can do the job all on its own. Chances are also pretty good that your opponent would already have a decent number of poison counters by the time you play Scitherex, so he might just win the game in a single swing. Scitherex hasn't gained any points though since 2011. At number 8, it is Phyrexian Crusader. This 3 mana 2/2, of course, comes with Infect, but it doesn't stop there. It has First Strike and protection from red and white. All of that makes it incredibly difficult to block and kill. And First Strike combos really nicely with Infect, since the Crusader hits an opposing creature first, so even if the creature may have been big enough to take down the Crusader, there's a chance it won't be big enough by the time it does combat damage. Your opponent often just has to let it through unblocked, but the way Infect decks work, it may get buffed enough to kill them in a hurry. It was played in Infect decks in both Block and Standard, and in Extended it was a sideboard card in Fairy decks. For a long time, all of its points were gained in 2011, but it actually started to see a little bit of play in Modern in 2022 in Creature Toolbox decks. These decks run lots of singleton creatures that are great in specific situations, and they can be searched up at will with Chord of Calling and the like. In the right matchup, Phyrexian Crusader is unbeatable, so we may see more of it in the main deck and sideboard of Modern Toolbox decks. At number 7, it is iCore Clawmer. This Infect creature is only a 2 mana 1/1, but if it gets blocked, it buffs up to a 3/3. This is kind of a form of evasion, as it really disincentivizes blocking it. As we've seen, Infect creatures that put the opposing player in that kind of bind are pretty great. iCore Clamor has gained points in Infect decks in Block, Standard, and Modern, but it hasn't gained any points since 2018. At number 6, it is Phyrexian Unlife. This card doesn't technically have Infect or give it to anything, but it does make it so that damage that is dealt to its controller is done as if that source has Infect. I decided that was enough to include it here, especially because this is a really interesting way to utilize Infect as a mechanic. Phyrexian Unlife makes it so you no longer lose the game for having 0 or less life, but obviously the change in the way damage is dealt to you does mean you can die to poison counters. Phyrexian Unlife has gained all of its points in modern ad nauseam decks. These are combo decks that look to use ad nauseam to draw the entire library. With Unlife in play, you're able to do that because you don't have to worry about losing for having 0 or less life. Sometimes Phyrexian Unlife can also buy the deck time, like if it gets played when you're at a really low life total, it suddenly gives you a few more turns to find your ad nauseam. Phyrexian Unlife is going to keep on gaining points in Modern. At number 5, it is Viridian Corruptor. This Infect creature is a 3-mana 2/2 that destroys an artifact when it enters the battlefield. Several creatures with Infect are just Phyrexianized versions of cards we met in the original Mirrodin block, showing us the fate of some of those creatures. In this case, we're looking at a completed version of Viridian Shaman. That kind of flavor is pretty cool. The Corruptor has seen play in Infect decks in both Standard and Modern, but it's also seen significant play outside of Infect decks. In both Standard and Modern, it was useful for dealing with the powerful Birthing Pod as well as other artifacts. The Corruptor has also seen play in Legacy Berserk Poison decks, which can win the game even more quickly than Infect variants in non-eternal formats. The Corruptor looks pretty well positioned to gain more points in the future. At number 4, it is Glistener Elf. This is a 1-mana creature with Infect. Sure, it doesn't do anything else, but it can also threaten the opponent incredibly early by simply coming down on turn 1 and getting buffed all over the place on turn 2. Sometimes just winning the game that early. For example, this can be accomplished with Mutagenic Growth, Groundswell, and Might of Old Krosa. Most Infect decks have several other ways to accomplish this on turn 2, this is but one example. The ability to come down earlier than any other Infect creature has led to the Glistener seeing play in both Modern and Legacy Infect decks, and that's likely to continue. At number 3, it is Blighted Agent. I've talked a few times about how good evasion is with Infect. Well, Blighted Agent offers the absolute best kind of evasion there is. It simply can't be blocked. The Agent was part of one of the more busted Modern decks of all time, Blazing Shoal Infect. This deck could consistently win the game by discarding an expensive red card to Blazing Shoal and targeting the Agent on turn 3. Obviously, the Agent couldn't be blocked, and because the Shoal was free, you could usually protect everything with counter magic, so it was virtually unstoppable. This deck existed for exactly one event, and it was banned after the very first Modern Pro Tour in 2011. Even without the absurd Blazing Shoal win available, Blighted Agent's Infect and Unblockable combo makes it an attractive choice in Infect decks in both Modern and Legacy, and it looks likely that it will continue to gain points. That said, the 2 cards in front of it are probably also going to keep gaining points, so it may never be able to surpass its number 3 slot. At number 2, it is Blightsteel Colossus. By far the largest creature with Infect, it's a Phyrexianized version of Darksteel Colossus from the original Mirrodin block. This thing brings indestructibility and trample to the board and can quite easily end the game in a single swing without you having to fire off a bunch of combat tricks to get there. The Colossus hasn't ever actually been played in Infect decks, largely because those decks want to stick an early Infect creature and go to town. At 12 mana, that doesn't quite work out with Darksteel Colossus. Instead, it's been a win condition for decks that are great at cheating massive creatures into play early. It's gained all of its points in the Eternal formats, which have the most powerful and consistent ways to do this. In Legacy, it's been cheated into play with Koldatha Forgemaster, or ramped into using Metalworker. In Vintage, there are no shortage of ways to cheat it into play, with Oath of Druids and Tinker being the most common ways to do it. The Colossus has been played in a ton of Vintage decks. Even Storm decks tend to run Tinker and the Colossus as a backup win condition, leading to its fairly massive score in the format. It's likely to continue to gain points going forward. However, it's more than 100 points behind the number 1 card on the list, which is Inkmoth Nexus, which is a phyrexianized version of Blinkmoth Nexus. This is arguably the best creature land ever printed. It can tap for colorless mana, but you can also pay 1 mana to turn it into a 1 mana 1/1 with flying and Infect. That's right, if you're playing against an Infect deck, you even have to worry about a land taking you down. It's been played in every single Infect deck in Block, Standard, Modern, and Legacy. However, the Nexus's massive score is a result of being great even outside of Infect decks. In Standard, it was played in Tempered Steel decks, in which case it was often a 3/3 when it became a creature. In Modern, it was a great card for Affinity and Hardened Scale decks, which use Arcbound Ravager to move counters around, which can create lethal out of nowhere. More recently in Modern, it's also been played in Hammer Time decks, which can quickly slap Colossus Hammer on the Nexus. It might lose flying when you do that, but it also wins the game in one swing. The Nexus is still played a ton, and that's not changing anytime soon. So, those are the 10 cards with Infect that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you're looking to infect your opponent, check out the description, where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card in this video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on past videos, including many more that look at keywords and mechanics, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.